Hello, I'm Judith Panera, Executive Director of AMC and AMC Foundation. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's program. Thank you for joining us. Our offices are located in New York, and today I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, location situated upon the unceded seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and the labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities past and present. This acknowledgement asks us each to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. AMC is dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for today's program and all our programs, events, and overall work, as well as the outlets to make a direct or anonymous report of a violation, has been posted in our chat feature. We are grateful to our attendees for making space in their schedule to join us. I also want to acknowledge and welcome all our members here today and express our gratitude to them for being part of our community. We give thanks to our speakers for sharing their experiences and knowledge in today's candid and open forum. Please also be sure to check out our YouTube channel to see recordings of past programs as well. Thank you again for joining us. And now to begin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Ayers. I would like to welcome everyone to today's discussion about geographical inclusivity. This is going to be a really informal, talk rather than something that's a little more intense and structured. So first, I would like to invite all of our guests to engage in the conversation as it progresses, rather than waiting until the end to ask questions and answers. It's a really exciting opportunity for us to collaborate, especially those in rural spaces, with arts professionals from various backgrounds and locales. So I hope that we all take advantage of this opportunity. To start, I would like to have our guests introduce themselves. They're both very multifaceted and talented women, and I know that I will do a disservice if I try to do it. So their full bios are going to be available with AMC, as is with mine. I am Sarah Ayers. I will be the moderator. I have spent the last 20 years working in the art sector, largely within urban spaces. So it's kind of funny. I grew up in a really small town, moved to the city to pursue the arts, and very cliche and stereotypically, I moved back to my small town 20 years later and launched an experimental art space, Patch in Remington. So that's my brief little blurb. So I would like to invite Lori and Holly to introduce themselves. Holly, would you like to lead the charge?
Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Holly Dahl. My Lakota name is Anpao, which means first light woman. I am located in Bismarck Mandan of North Dakota, and I'm an enrolled citizen with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. My background lies predominantly in rural communities, but also in arts communities, especially artists of color and equity work. And I will talk more about that later, I'm sure. So I'll pass it over to Lori.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Lori McColl. I came from a very small town, about an hour and a half outside of Detroit. I'm based in Detroit now. I have over 20 years of experience working in the technology and data space, and have a passion for the creative economy and supporting the initiatives of the creative economy within our urban and rural spaces. So this is an honor for me to try to make technology and data a little bit more accessible for folks, small businesses and creatives or makers. That's a lot of the work that we do with some of the brands here. So we're here to share how you can think differently about technology and how you can apply it to share your creative work with a broader audience. So.
And again, you can see everybody's full bios if you're curious in any of the specific projects that we're all involved in at artcurators.org, or I believe that they've also been posted in the chat. Today's topic obviously has to do with geographical inclusivity. It was really prompted by the conversations that were being had during COVID that I noticed stopped being had once everybody kind of returned to normal life. This idea of including audiences outside of the urban context, specifically artists and art organizations, and identifying that gap and really wanting to bring that conversation back to the forefront because it is such an important conversation to have. So a lot of our conversation today is not just going to be identifying potential issues that are faced when you work within that capacity, like within a rural space, but also different ways in which we can move forward or engage or increase visibility, whether it's through tech programming or interpersonal relationships. So with that spirit in mind, I would like to begin by asking our panelists, but also those of you joining us virtually, to identify what comes to mind when we say the word rural. For those of you joining us virtually, I would encourage you to type your initial just knee-jerk reaction into the chat. And for Holly and Lori, I would like to ask you the same question. When you hear the word rural, what word or words come to mind?
Anybody want to go first?
Don't fight over it. It's totally fine.
No, I mean, for me, I think about our small communities. When I think of rural, I think of our farming communities, just because that's where a lot of where I came from. But because I came from Southwest Ontario, we had the beauty of being surrounded by a number of our First Nations tribes as well. So we had kind of a balance of farming, small businesses, makers. And so I think of our small towns and communities that when I hear rural, our farmers.
Natalie?
I think of the word like resilience.
Mhm.
I think of also family as opposed to community because of how like everyone knows each other. Yeah, those are my words.
Yeah, so this is a big conversation starter for me, especially when I have these sorts of larger conversations. And some of the other words that I thought would be interesting to bring up, because I think we need to recognize when we consider moving forward, family was a big one, community also a big one, simple, because there are some not so positive words, uneducated, vacant, middle of nowhere, and friends. So it really runs the gamut between this real version of solidarity and not really, this is kind of a space to be dismissed. So as we move forward in today's conversation, I always like to keep those words in mind because we all do have these preconceptions or these connotations that we put on a word that seems as simple as a geographic location. It's much more than that. And it's a very nuanced word and it's a very complicated conversation to have. So kind of laying it out there early on. But anyway, I hope that we'll see more of these words kind of pop through the chat as this goes on. So since this panel is obviously on the rural and the many ways that that can look, I would like to begin with a brief introduction to your personal engagement with rural spaces. So Lori, I know you were raised on a 4th generation family farm before launching your tech agency. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shaped your interest in technology and in what ways you currently approach advocating for rural spaces through the tech-based opportunities?
Yeah, I think I'm still like noodling over your words, Sarah, on rural. It's really interesting because I think there's a lot of ingenuity that I learned from our family and our community. And technology at the time when I was growing up was the opposite of how things were done. I remember growing up, it was pretty analog and searching for college on like dial-up networks that took forever just to get simple information was kind of where I was, at least college wise. So I think I went to school in the US. And so there was a lot of technology based companies, who had a strong presence in the college life. And so that's where I initially kind of started to explore different areas and different, disciplines. So my interest in tech really came from college. And then it wasn't as much as like computer programming, as much as it was managing information and how technology could connect information and how that information could generate data, which then could, solve problems or provide like an input into the problem solving side. So through the course of my entire career, technology has really evolved to where it is now, which can cover so many different elements. And so I think as I learn I think as we get a little bit older and start to return back to our roots of, what we knew and how we grew up, there's been a lot of initiatives to connect the rural communities. I know access to internet is a big push right now because it is absolutely critical to, connecting the small communities and to, working through the job process or the retraining process or the storytelling process. And so there's been also another kind of initiative I've been part of in the city here, which is, helping with workforce retraining and helping to, fill those technology gaps. And I think what I'm super passionate about from the rural space is this whole remote working community has allowed, a lot of different options for our rural, talent or our rural kind of youth to still plug in and, have a good job and share their work or, work with other kind of companies in different capacities. And so I think those are the things that I'm really interested in, because you can be a freelancer, you can be a content creator, you can be a maker and share your art and work in different ways. But you have to have those basic components of technology, connectivity, all those things to make it happen. So that's how I've been kind of looking at it. And I think the creative economy is really interesting to me and will be a huge force in the future.
Awesome, thank you. And Holly, you're currently working in multiple spaces and you wear many, many hats in the rural sector. So to begin, can you speak to the myriad of roles and organizations that you're engaged with, but also how your outreach and programming vary according to each space?
Yeah, I'll be as concise as I can be. Well, first and foremost, I myself am an artist, and that kind of like started my path. I started my art when I was like 2 or 3 years old. My mom taught me beading from that age, and it just took off. So I specialize in traditional Lakota art. And that is also one of the reasons why I carry like my cultural values, which align with like familial values and rural values through all of my roles. So this directly led to me starting up and being the president of Native Artists United. And in that work, we are North Dakota based, and we focus on uplifting and supporting Native artists across the state. And we do that by sort of supporting the artist economy by having different like marketing events, different art shows. And we also offer workshops that focus on professional and artistic development. So it ranges from like creating an artist portfolio, tax workshops, and also workshops on how to do traditional quill work. So it's all over the place. And I also kind of have a slight hand in philanthropy. So I'm part of a group called the Waterers. And with that, we focus on values-led funding and reaching out and tapping into more like rural forms of communication, or like more tapping into just your own like network. And we do that by, rather than having open applications for people, we do it via nomination process. And so the funding gets out to people that we might not be able to reach through technology. As Lori was saying, like, you know, access needs and not being able to access the internet is so huge, so huge, that we just kind of do the grapevine method. And that's how we've reached into communities that either don't have access, or another big thing is that they don't want to have access to the internet. But I also have a role in Arts Midwest, which is a regional arts organization. We cover 9 states. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, and I'm missing one, Michigan?
Michigan, it's us.
Yes. And in that area, I am the equity grant maker. And I also do internal equity analysis work. And I actually am just like finishing up my first round of it. So, and one of the things that I really focused on was how much of Arts Midwest dollars go into rural communities. And not a lot of it did. The goal is to fund every county in every state, and we're not quite there yet. So being able to take this information and apply it to future granting programs, and just crossing our fingers that we reach into these communities. And then the last role that I have is the role that Sarah had initially reached out to me in, was with the Department of Public Transformation. And there I oversee the Ignite Role program, which is a program that focuses on an at-home artist residency for artists of color that want to engage with their community some more. I had my first successful run this year with a cohort of 4, all in southwestern Minnesota. And I could go on about this program. It's really amazing. It's super flexible, and because it focuses solely on support, they were really able to kind of step into their own identity as a rural artist and apply like a more, I don't know, a bigger understanding to their community. Specifically one that I can think of, she went around and she talked to immigrants in her community. And a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of small towns, at least in like Minnesota and on the eastern side of North Dakota, have really large immigrant and refugee populations. So being able to go into these communities and directly talk to them and have storytelling workshops with them to get out their experience was really amazing to see. So next year I'm starting it up again. It should be launching probably in February or March, and I will be expanding across all of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. I was like, there's no way I'm going to get all of that. Thank you for that. So it's actually a really nice tie-in to the next question. And it seems to be a running thread even this early on in the conversation in terms of access. And so I know my space, it's in rural Michigan, population of, I think, 1,085 as of the last census. We only have fiber internet service in our downtown, which consists of about 2 blocks. So anybody that lives outside of that, which is the majority of our residents, still have dial-up. And especially during COVID, it became a real choice situation. You know, do the kids attend school online, or can I work online, or neither? You know, can this infrastructure, this existing infrastructure, even support this? So I know it is a bigger conversation, but in part because of that, and I think much like you, Holly, there are also people that are there that do not want to necessarily engage that with technology. They don't want to leave their email address. They don't, I'm never going to follow you on Facebook. Like, that's not a thing. So I know that we personally focus a lot on the personal relationships more than social media and tech-based outreach. I know that it probably seems somewhat counterintuitive because we think we can reach a much broader audience if we have online programming and content. But one of the hard lessons learned on our end was that it's still very much about personal relationships, and it's very much about those conversations. So you did a little bit of this before, but can you talk a little bit more about how you have or have not implemented technology into your practice? I think you acknowledged why, and maybe other ways that you've gone about engaging your local audience, again, with or without the use of technology.
Yeah. Oh, that's a meaty question. Um, it really changed based on the community that I was working in. So because I do regional work, it it's so different. Within North Dakota, any type of like online initiative that I tried doing, once COVID started, failed just instantly. There was no interest. There was no interest in online workshops. There was no interest in Zoom meetings. There was just very poor communication via email. And like I said, it's not just strictly access needs, but it's just not interested. So it just didn't exist for me. But on the flip side, in my DOPT role with Ignite Rural, that program was only able to happen because of online accesses. And I was able to do that work from here in North Dakota, reaching and connecting into southwestern Minnesota. And everyone in that program was able to like have the flexibility of having online programming and attending like cohort workshops and meetups and things like that. The one thing that I would say that kind of I got a lot of feedback on was the fact that there wasn't enough in-person gatherings, which of course was a funding issue, but it I don't know, it's just been really hard. I do try to have some type of online presence with anything that I do, but I always have a fallback of it just not happening. Or I've also recently started to learn more about how tapping into like familiar communication methods. So like to reach reservations, specifically in North Dakota, the number one way to do it is through tribal newspapers and tribal radio stations, which seems really silly. Like a lot of people don't realize that a lot of communities here really keep it, traditional. They keep it old school. And realizing that we need to put more money into those like methods of communication and going back to that really helps a lot. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it is kind of funny that you bring up the newspapers because we've definitely caught some, not say we caught some flack, but we definitely had some artists that we were working with that were a little disappointed to not see more social media content. But very similarly, our newspaper is the biggest driver of getting people into our place. And it just, people are like, who even buys a newspaper, especially a small town newspaper? But that newspaper is what brings people in, and that broader online thing, like it gets a couple likes, but in terms of getting people engaged and in the door, it's not quite as effective. So, similarly, we started having to redirect funds to go back into the newspaper or to get that sort of coverage, versus allocating it towards, Facebook advertising or things like that. This question is for Lori. So we've talked a little bit about this, many rurally based arts organizations are operating with very small staff and limited budgets. Since you work largely with creative sector clients from the tech side of things, what do you see as the most effective and practical ways to incorporate technology into outreach and programming?
Yeah, this was a really interesting discussion as far as like what you guys were sharing. If I take it back to like the strategy, so your question, Sarah, is more focused on how do you reach people from a programming side to get them more engaged? Is that the kind of part of the question?
Yeah, like if you were to say, okay, you have a team of 3 people, how do you actually implement technology practices in terms of outreach?
Yeah, I think with everything that we kind of build, we think about the different types of segments or people we're serving, right? In the experience design world, we call that the user personas. It sounds really weird, but from what I heard, at least from earlier in the discussion, right, you have a subset of people that you're trying to reach that you reach with a certain type of communication, right? The tribal news, those types of things, newspaper, right? That's a section of how you would allocate funds. And then you might have some subsets of people that you're serving that are super tech. And so we work through a lot of like the hybrid model, which is you kind of do a balance of both and double down on what your larger group needs for funding. So, I think a lot of it is strategy and that balance of meeting people where they're at. And I know that you were kind of sharing, Sarah, it's like on the social side, that's where a lot of people are connecting and sharing and learning about things. But the reality is that the way you actually get people in the door to support the programming and engaging is through some of the more traditional ways. So I think there's a lot of operational ways that you could think about it. There's a lot of technology that you can implement in the team side for small teams to help automate things that are really easy and accessible for your teams. There's a lot of automation tools. There's a lot of ways that you can simplify things. But I think doubling down and putting resources to where you actually see like your success metrics happen. So if success is having X number of people participate in your program and you found that, this way of communicating with them works the most effectively, then that's where you should put the resources, for now. But a balance of like social and other different types of outreach. But I kind of believe in meeting people where they are and having a hybrid model that really serves the people you're trying to serve. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that you brought up the sort of internal ways in which we can use technology. I think that I always think of using technology as an organization as something that's external. This idea of like, we're putting out all these pictures on Instagram or whatever, or we're doing webinars or we're doing whatever. I never really think about it as a tool to save time so I can allocate those resources to those more maybe personal relationships or things like that. So it's a valid point and something to consider, certainly.
Yeah, we do a lot of like team employee experience work where we'll take some of the most manual processes that are happening behind the scenes operationally for teams and automate those as much as possible, like even just automating, website community outreach or the hello at blank, blank, blank. You can actually implement automation tools that would take, a question or an outreach or an email inbox and automate that into, your newsletter group or all those types of things. So that's taking like 3 manual steps that someone would have to check the email, add that person to a list, or even just automating responses to general questions. There's a whole bunch of other ways. And then there's some really cool things that are kind of out there with what you can add on to websites or other different social, channels. So yeah, employee experience and automating, automating kind of some of your processes is probably an opportunity that you could scale and do more with a tight budget.
Thank you. So the next prompt in the conversation kind of coincides with the question that came through. So I'll start with the introduction, the follow up with a chat question that we received. So obviously COVID changed a lot about engagement, relocation, people migrating to rural communities, and that's a very nuanced and sometimes complicated relationship, having been in that space. So we have a question from Emily that says, I've always seen the digital nomad as a complicated role, since oftentimes folks from cities move into rural communities known for their beauty and simplicity. This is going on in my town currently, as is mine. How do you think about this movement along with the concepts like gentrification and exploitation? I have a lot of heavy thoughts here, but I'm going to open it up to our panelists because you guys are the panelists and I'm simply the moderator. So maybe Holly, you'd like to lead the charge since you are in a more rural space than Lori.
I mean, I here in North Dakota haven't really experienced that much where I'm located. I think it's because most people don't want to live in North Dakota because our weather is so bad. But I do know what you mean about people. I don't know, it does feel like people come in and sort of just want to change and not really learn about the community. And there really isn't a lot of like relationship building being done, as opposed to just coming in. I know that there's been like a couple new businesses opening, and our population can't keep up with the demand to keep the businesses in business.
Mhm.
So that's been like an interesting thing that I've been seeing. Like something will come up and be open for maybe, I think the smallest I've seen was like 2 months.
Oh,
And the
wow.
longest that I've seen for new business was, there's a couple still going, but maybe like a year and a half, and then it kind of fades off a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if I've experienced it to a degree that like you two have, or Emily in the chat has, but I can see where you're coming from.
Larry, do you have anything that you'd like to say?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, because the way that I look at it, and I can't say that this is the case for where I grew up, but I think it's this balance between economic development, which means, digital nomads are attracted to, a rural community for its interest, right? That's they might come in and bring different experiences, or start small businesses, or support the economy in different ways. With retention, which is growing and providing opportunities for those who have been part of those rural communities for a really, really long time. It's a difficult balance. And I think there just has to be a really strong kind of core city culture, or community, or series of folks that are sharing their voices in how this could have a greater impact. I think, Sarah, about you and your council work. I think that's an amazing way to get involved, and to ensure that, you're supporting the natural flow, or the flow of new people coming into a particular area, maybe contributing to the local economy, but you're also protecting what is really important about that local culture, beliefs, values. So that's a tough question to answer. Yeah.
I'll speak very briefly on this because it's not really my show, but I recently did a lot of research into this, and just published an essay about the democratization of art in rural spaces. So really thinking about how art and relocation and the sort of migration patterns can shape rural communities, and the sort of dangers of it, right? With things like gentrification and displacement, which we see a lot. I live in an area that's very much like that, where as a direct result of COVID, property values have more than doubled, which theoretically seems great for those of us that already had houses in the area. That being said, the decline in the year-round population and of the younger population means that the elementary school is closing. So there's a consolidation of kids and families, right? And if we don't have the families, what does that mean for the long-term sustainability of our communities? And so it becomes a very sort of complicated and hard conversation to have, because I don't necessarily think people move to a rural community and say, I'm going to displace everybody. It's beautiful. But there are very real and very direct and indirect ways in which it affects the local families, especially, and work opportunities and all these sorts of things. So it's a very heavy conversation. But one thing that I would do to really encourage voices being heard, and this is one of the things that I even do here, is I encourage people to go to the meetings. Like if there's a council meeting, it may be dry, and it likely will be, and it's going to be small town politics, and it's going to be pretty boring. But I think it's really important to have a voice at the table. It's really important to be heard. And a lot of times, for better or worse, that means going to these meetings, because many people that are relocating are familiar with them. I don't want to say in all situations, but in many situations, at least where I am, it's typically people that have more money. I'm just going to say it, the fact that you can pay twice as much for maybe a seasonal home as someone's year-round home. there's a lot that goes into that, but I think making sure that there's just a voice. And I think, being seen in these conversations, showing up to these meetings, being like, I'm here, there's a way that we can work together collaboratively. And I also think that some of that the responsibility does fall to the municipal leaders to say, like, we need these regular benchmarks. What is this looking like? How is this affecting our community? Not just right now, which is great because we're making all this money because we now have increased property values and everything. But what does this look like long-term when there aren't kids growing up here, and when all these retirees either sell or, hate to say it, like die off, right? Like, who's carrying this town down the line if we sort of destruct all of these interpersonal relationships? I don't know if that's a really great answer, but I mean, I would just really encourage you to be vocal and to be seen. I think it's such a big part of it. And we don't often see that until it gets really far and really deep into that process. So be present from the onset.
I think, Sarah, I might add on to what you said, because I think it was so important. So for large developments that are happening, there's a number of things I'm thinking about. So not only involved in those council meetings from the public side, there are public forums. If a large parcel of land is getting a massive tax abatement, those are public hearings. Having relationships with your council folks or whoever's representing your district is super important, because they are the ones making some of those decisions. And then any major project that could be potentially happening in your area involving a large parcel of land goes through the master planning process and requires public input into it. So being involved in those things and being a strong, united voice for what the community, needs, I think is really important, because a lot of those things can just get passed through without, with different reasons for why that might happen. But being really involved in your council and your city and with your representatives, I think is important.
This kind of answers the next question that we had prompted, which was, have either of you seen shifts or had to adapt post-COVID, and they can look like an increase in population or a shift in resources. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead just for those on the inside that have the questions already. Holly, we've talked a little bit before. You are first and foremost an artist, and we're coming at this, or at least I am, from the curatorial hat or the more like academic perspective, and you're a practical or practicing artist. How do your outreach strategies shift depending on that hat you're wearing? If you're, as an artist, are you like, what are your platforms? Do you have them? How do you engage with your audience differently than if you're working, as a representative, or, what are gaps that you can identify in the way you can and cannot engage to a broader audience?
I don't think my outreach strategies shift at all.
Really?
Yeah, I think I carry myself the same in every role that I have. I like to think so anyway. This has actually been something that people have brought up to me recently. The more that I expand into these different roles, the more this exact question has came up. And I've done a lot of reflecting on it. And I really don't think that my strategies change much. As I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of my work is just based in values and like cultural teachings. And that is something that I refuse to let go of. So I carry that with me, like even in like my Arts Midwest role, which, it's a regional arts organization. No, I don't change myself to fit that role. And I am really transparent about that too. When I go into these places, I'm like, no, this is how I am. This is what's worked for me. This is just being who I am and looking at things as an artist, as a community member, as a woman of color, and applying that and hoping that they take that and run with it.
Fair enough. Yeah, respect to that. So do you find, and I guess I'm thinking of this more from an artist perspective, and I know that you have such a strong core of who you are. I mean, I think that comes across really early on in conversations, but do you see any gaps, or I guess I'm thinking gaps in access to a broader audience? So for example, I think that many artists are like, I want to make this money and I want to have a show in New York and I want to have a show in LA. Are you, I guess that number one, that the question is that something that you want to advocate for? But B, if there are artists in your community, for example, that want to pursue that trajectory, what are gaps, like from an organizational perspective, that you've been able to identify, or how do you help them try to bridge those gaps, or what could other arts organizations try to do to leverage their art community?
Yeah. This sort of taps into those words that you were saying at the very beginning. I really hate using the word like uneducated. You know, I think that it's a privilege thing, you know, to be able to access higher education. But I would say not understanding the language that organizations use, not understanding like the criteria to get like funding, or even realizing that there are organizations that give out funding to people to do these things is a huge thing. And I think on the organizational side, this is work that we get paid to do, right? to give out money. And so I think the responsibility should lie on the organization to do research into the communities. And that's where I've seen not a lot happening. It's one of those like, well, we posted it, it's in our newsletter, you know, and I don't know why we're not reaching, you know, more organizations in North Dakota. It's out there, you know, this one organization that we know there should help us out, but it's not happening. And it's on the organization side to build those relationships, to meet people where they're at. Yeah, that's been a really big issue. Is just trying to, you know, I don't know. I don't understand how like specific language is so required and so many like hoops you have to jump through to get $5,000, you know. It's kind of ridiculous in my end. So that's something that I'm trying to shift a bit more just in the roles that I have. Because rural artists are amazing and they have so many great ideas and they should get that exposure. And, you know, just being themselves and doing that work along with probably a full-time job as well and their family, and then also being expected to take the time and energy to go actively look for, you know, opportunities and then try and fit yourself into the mold that the organization is asking for is just a little too much, in my opinion. So just kind of trying to shift the organizational view to meet people better is one massive thing that's been standing out to me.
Yeah. I like that the certain words that really stood out to me in that were the idea of accountability and accessibility, and then education, because education is so paramount in all of these things, right? Like you said, trigger words like uneducated. Well, you know, whose responsibility is that, right? Like if you don't grow up around art, how do you learn to speak about it and how do you learn to advocate for it? So, you know, identifying these gaps in those, whether from an organizational capacity or more systemic capacity, I think are launching pads for much longer conversations than we have today, for sure. And Lori, I don't know if there's any anything that you would want to add to that, I guess, for, you know, because my initially posed question is, you know, but then conversations always take on a life of their own. So this has changed a little bit, which I'm actually really excited about. But do you, in consideration of these things, see opportunities as viable for encouraging, or what opportunities do you see as viable for encouraging local artists to expand beyond the rural purview? Like, are there certain platforms? Obviously, there are geographical barriers to access in terms of galleries and cultural institutions, but how do you see artists being able to effectively leverage their careers if they want someone that wants to maybe branch out a little bit more? Do you think it is these sort of social media based platforms? Do you think it's, I don't know, I mean, the tech space is not really my world. So what are strategies that you could see people implementing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple layers. And I think about some stories that are coming out of just the city where I live, these can be applied to rural artists as well. Creating and amplifying your personal brand is now more important than ever. And there is a real interest in learning about a process, and whatever that might be, from the art side, design side, from Holly, you mentioned the beadwork. I mean, there is a way to amplify kind of what you do and share that in a different way post-COVID. If I think about some of the social platforms that are really kind of helping with that amplification, it is those platforms that are using short form video that help you kind of share your artwork, share the process. I think I was telling you, Sarah, I'm learning how to make the rancher style hats from creators all over the place. I'm learning how to, how Korean food is made at home from different levels. Like you're able to share your craft and amplify it. But it starts with feeling that's not for everybody, and may not be, it comes with some downsides too. But I'd first think about like how you could amplify your expertise and your passions. And then, the second piece would be to look at how your art could be applied in really different ways. I think about some of our muralists and artists here who may be doing commissioned pieces on buildings or in their, their own galleries, but are now like doing partnerships with the local, shoemaking company here, or the local denim company. There's an amazing combination of partnerships and collaborations that are possible if you think about how you could apply your art and your skills and your passions in different ways. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for artists if that's something they're interested in. So I think those two things, really amplifying your passion, amplifying and creating your storytelling and your personal brand or your artist brand, and amplifying that across social platforms, but also thinking about how your art could be applied in totally different ways.
Yeah. I love that both of you in very, very different ways kind of underscore the importance of collaboration, this importance of working with other groups and other organizations that maybe are not traditionally seen within the purview of what you would do. I think that's really, and I think it's an opportunity. I know it's not necessarily unique to rural spaces, but I think that rural spaces have an advantage because there is such interconnectivity and these relationships that already exist. It really can set a beautiful foundation for collaboration. And I think that's one of the things that's consistently underestimated when people think of rural spaces. It's not just one person 9,000 miles from somebody else. And if they are, they probably have a good relationship with those people, right? So the idea that it's so fundamental to the existence of folks that do reside in rural spaces is such a strength that I think isn't always tapped into. It's a really great resource. So, we've talked a lot about challenges and issues, and I'm sure that there are many, many more that we could talk about, but I'm also a really big fan of trying to find real world solutions. So as we're thinking about closing our panel, I'd like to talk about practical application options for rural arts organizations. Before I launch into our last few questions, again, I would like to invite our audience to contribute to the chat. I know we've kind of wandered a little bit, so if there are any questions that you would like to ask, I invite you to ask them now. And I would also encourage folks to make suggestions in the chat. What is one tool that you've used that you think could assist other organizations? It could be anything from back-end organizational tips that have helped you streamline processes to public-facing strategies. So ultimately, if you could make one suggestion to other arts organizations, what would that be? And so while we wait for some of those answers to roll in, I'd like to pose our final questions to our panelists. So we've talked a little bit about this before, and perhaps this is redundant, or maybe there's something new that you'd like to add, but coming from the tech space, what are the most practical skills or programs that we should consider as we're considering outreach? And what have you seen, or where have you seen the biggest gaps, or where art can make the biggest gains? I know that a lot of times folks come to you, and I know that I have personally, I've been like, help me, I don't know what I'm doing. Do you have that one question that is asked over and over and over, especially from the creative sector? So I guess if you could identify what that question would be, but also like what feedback do you give, or what suggestions do you make before someone may even approach you? You know, like, do you have, here are preliminary questions to consider? You know, how should someone like me as an arts organizer or a curator compile my thoughts to present to you, rather than just basically having like word salad thrown at you when I'm in a panic?
I love it. One of the things that we always start with organizations is we look at the problem that you're trying to solve and framing that problem, whether it be outreach of up to a specific group regarding XYZ, like, framing that, or framing the opportunity that you might have. And then from there, what we really do, Sarah, is we look at kind of the flow of your information, the flow of how you work with your artists or those that you're supporting, and look at where there's kind of some friction points or some heavy manual processes. We kind of call it walk the wall. So if you know your processes and your flows of how, the people you're serving come into your organization, how you communicate with them, how you share resources, if there are programs, how you work to educate and then share other programs with them. So I think about it from like that perspective. I wish I had like a punch list of questions, a cheat sheet for you guys, but each business is really different. And so we kind of look at each problem or opportunity in its unique way. And if you know your processes and how you support and serve each of your, different types of groups, then you can tackle it from that perspective for prioritization.
Nice, thank you. And Holly, what have you found most useful within the organizations in which you're involved?
What have I found most useful? I would say when an organization has, or rather embraces, flexibility and understanding. So the organizations that I'm involved with proactively like have workshops for staff on like how to communicate, on how to, different marketing techniques, and also like anti-bias training, things like that. You can never have too much of it, in my opinion. And it's always nice to go back yearly and refresh it. And also for artists, I would say, and this is where I might get like more personal, is like tips and tricks that I would suggest to artists is to be brave. One thing that I have noticed with all of the artists that I've worked with in the communities that I like, specifically Minnesota and the Dakotas, is there is not a lot of confidence in going out into finding opportunities or even accepting opportunities when they come to you. And it sort of ties in, with the not educated, the not understanding language part. So there's no confidence to go and apply for, programs or funding and things like that. And I have seen a handful of artists who just like throw caution to the wind and they go after things, and they are really like just taking off right now, which is great. So yeah, just being able to like be brave and take chances and go for organizations that have the same ideals as you, really, and for organizations to meet them where they are. So that's that.
I love that. So we have a little bit of time left, so we're going to answer a couple of questions. Holly, you just spoke a little bit to some of the artists that you know that are taking off. Who should we know? Like, who should be on our radar, I guess, whether artistically or organizationally, as we look ahead to expanding our audiences?
I will name 2 artists,
Okay.
and I'll also name 2 organizations. So
Awesome.
the 2 artists, one is Diana Dakota, Diana, and then Dakota is Deceteou. And she does like really, really great photography, really like raw stuff. And she does like a lot of drawing and portraits and stuff. And she's also had like her first show in Minneapolis at the All My Relations Gallery. Really great stuff. She's just now beginning to step into her artistic identity. And the other is Awana Gajik Bruce. I will type that name. And they focus on merging traditional and like contemporary art together. So like they'll focus on traditional birch, traditional quill work, but then they'll also add like LED lights to it. Or yeah, it's really interesting. And they have also just like started taking off this year. The organizations, one in North Dakota is Sacred Pipe Resource Center. They do a lot of community engagement. They also work with other organizations on like communication styles, and they like do everything under the sun, like anything from artists, like art workshops to, how to be elected into like a council position and how to support them, how to talk to Senate, things like that, just all over the place. And the other organizations in South Dakota called Racing Magpie, and they focus on the artist economy, specifically Native artist economy in South Dakota. Really great stuff. So I will type those into the chat.
Awesome. And then Lori, what about you? I mean, I think this is actually just a really fun question. What are a couple of organizations or folks that you think should be on people's radar?
So we do a lot of work with our local city, county, region, and state economic development organizations. And we're helping them implement and support sharing information to, at least in our city, 60,000 small businesses. I think, Holly, you mentioned like that part of your job is giving away money. It is unbelievable how much money is available across a number of different ways for artists, small businesses. Our state, Sarah, even the MEDC, our Michigan Economic Development Corporation, will support small businesses traveling internationally to expand their art or their businesses. So the biggest thing I would try to do is, and some of these organizations that you were mentioning are probably funded through these economic development organizations at the state and region level. But there is a lot of money in the infrastructure bills that have been granted to states, cities, if it's around the creative economy, the artist economy, workforce retraining, all of those kind of things. And there are so many technical financial assistance resources for, I think our artists are little small businesses, right? A solopreneur, an artist is a small business, and it's unbelievable how many resources are there to teach you all elements of your business at your region and state and city levels. So that's the biggest thing I kind of share. And then the second thing that I would really think about, tied in with the creative economy, we spend a lot of time looking at those who are in design, who might be freelancing, trying to make a living wage, might be photographers, artists, videographers, storytellers, for content creation and support for larger entities. And so while a photographer may be really focused on their particular medium and their art, there's opportunities to have additional revenue streams, maybe supporting, other cultural things that might be happening at a city level or entity level. So again, it's like thinking about how you could apply things in different ways to diversify all those income streams that allow you to keep doing what you love. So those are the two things I would leave with the group.
Do you have, I'm going to be that guy and put you really on the spot right now, Lori, but do you have the name of a specific resource? I mean, I guess, or at least personally, like I can type in MEC, I get really inundated with a lot of information and I get it. And I'm obviously have worked in that space, but do you have like, for somebody that say is wanting to learn how to do social media or potentially like diversify their revenue streams from whatever in the tech space, do you have like one resource you'd say this is a really useful handbook or this is a really useful website and how to navigate that?
That's a great question because I'm thinking about our rural communities. So I know in our city, there are a very specific set of resource guides that are available. I know in our state, our entire state is carved out into districts. And so if you started at the Michigan economic development level or the North Dakota economic development level, you'd be able to identify what resources would be your district. And so I think it might be a location by location specific.
Gotcha.
I wish I could say like there was, like, I mean, if you are a woman-owned business, the We Bank, a women-owned business website is probably an opportunity. Small business, SBAM here, small business websites would be a good resource. So I think it might be kind of specific, but if you start looking around at the state level and then drill down, you might be able to find what resources are available in each of your kind of rural district areas.
Awesome. And I'm going to take
I'm
the opportunity too to just do a couple shout outs because why not? My friend Rosa Maria Zamaron is an incredible photographer. She does a lot of work really exploring her heritage as a Mexican American woman. Really powerful like photojournalist work. And I can't say enough good things about the work that she's done and that she continues to do. And I would also throw into this mix because the district where I am, the county where I am, is one of the 13 most underserved counties in the state of Michigan as it comes to art and culture. To throw on that map, the Cass Area Artists Group. They are for a really small organization. They really have been advocating for our local arts community. I know that it's always an uphill battle, but they've really pulled together to try to present a lot of incredible opportunities to our local artists. And it's also fun too, when I think about the ways in which we engage our audience, like they set up a booth at the county fair, which is just kind of this fun way to engage a new audience to with the arts or to start to have these conversations about art because they're not often in our local schools. So they're bringing a much needed breath of life, I think, into the county's arts space. Let's see, we have a handful of minutes. Let's we'll do one more. And this is a kind of weighty one. I feel like we got really light and we did all these shout outs and it's great. And I'm going to bring it right back down. I'm going to bring it down again. And I think some of these are very obvious, but what are unique challenges that you faced directly due to geography? And I think that probably, it can mean a lot of things, but I'll let you both run with that question. Holly, I'm gonna put you on the spot this time. I threw Lori under the bus last time, so it's only fair to take it back to you.
Okay, that's okay. Unique challenges. Well, I could talk about what I've already talked about, which is, access.
Right.
And also just being like so far away from everything. I live in the middle of the state. And like, even to go to our largest city, it's like a 4-hour drive for me, or to go to Minneapolis, which is like a really nice hub, is like 7.5 hours for me. And I guess the other thing, I can get really meaty, I guess, if you want, is like racism. Because I work a lot with artists of color, and like most of my background is in Native art. It's been really hard to be able to get the whole of my community, even in a rural place, who knows of this work, to truly support it, and understanding like the cultural ties to a lot of this type of work and the work that the artists do, and like the significance of the story and the methods and the materials used and why that contributes to like asking prices for work. And they're like, well, that looks easy, I can make it. And there's just like a lack of understanding and not wanting to understand about the complexities behind it, not even as an artist of color, but as an artist who has like very, detail and like hard work that they do and they focus on. Like any medium really has its own challenges, and having the larger of the community not really understand the amount of effort that goes into it. Those are probably the biggest things I would say, especially after like our pipeline protest that we had here. There was a lot of resistance to support people of color in small towns and across the whole state, really. And that's kind of what led me to expand my own work into Minnesota more, is because I didn't feel supported where I'm at. Not that I stopped doing it, but it's rough in that sense as well.
I think one of the sort of encouraging takeaways from that last sentence that you had is that, you had this really unique and really challenging situation, but it served as a catalyst for you to create opportunity, right? Like it flipped that script. And so I'm going to actually reposition that and ask that question. What's the most unique sort of opportunity you've been given because you're in a rural space? I know for us, like we can take risks that I cannot take if I had a $3,000 a month rent, right? Like we can take chances on the artists that we bring through and on the content and the conversations and the dialogues we push forward, because it's not entirely driven by exorbitant rent and these sorts of things. Holly, what would be, and I'm going to target you again because you're in that space. You kind of named one opportunity that you were presented almost by necessity. But are there other opportunities that you have been granted because of the location in which you reside?
On a personal level, it's really helped me connect with my community and like my own culture, because I grew up off reservation. So I kind of felt like a disconnect, but stepping more into like the roles that I have and stepping more into the Native art world has really like connected me to it. And I've been able to make a lot of great relationships with community members around that, and being able to like understand each other when I wasn't able to before, because art and culture are inherently tied together, and anyone who practices, especially like traditional arts, has so much history. So I've been really able to go back in my own roots like a lot because of it. And that's something that I really appreciate, because it completely like, I credit that, and of course my mom, to like the person that I am now, and like how headstrong it's made me. It's made me want to more actively step into an advocate role. And it's hard, but I really, really appreciated it.
I think it's fascinating how often artists or people that work in the creative sector in rural spaces somehow become involved in advocacy in some way or another. Like I relocated and saw all of these issues, like, whoa, like I'm home and people I know are having to move, these sorts of things. now I am engaged with local politics. Never something I wanted to do. Like you're talking about the person that used to go out and like protest all these things, right? But there's also something to be said for having that seat at the table. So I think that it's always interesting how people in rural spaces carry so many different parts of what they do and often become, you know, spokespeople or advocates for the communities in which they're engaged. And I think that's really also something that's incredible and largely underrated. Lori, what are your thoughts on this? I know that you're in Detroit now, but do you have anything that you'd like to add in regards to the unique challenges / opportunities due to geography?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about it because the unique challenges for each location kind of tie back to, in some cases, what your location might be known for. Like I think about really trying to do something different in what is an automotive mobility city has been challenging. If I think about some of the things we were working on, Sarah, together around how we could look at manufacturing in a different way in a different industry, right? And challenges that had. So I don't think the grass is greener on the other side in all cases, and that challenges and lack of resources and all of these different things can sometimes open up a path and a path, a pivot, a different level of mastery, a different direction, and that's okay. That's kind of the beauty of life, and that, you know, great things can come out of really hard situations. So, you know, I don't know. I think I like how you reframed the question, which is what opportunities have come. Well, there's a lot of opportunities that have come because we are doing something really different in a place that's not traditionally known for that. But then we've also looked at, you know, where there are some really great stories coming from. I think, Holly, you mentioned, like, I've had to look at more Minnesota, you know, that way. There are pockets where great things are happening, and there's new places that are kind of popping up with really great stories and innovative ways that they're using funds and building community and tapping into those things that also help you, you know, expand your physical location. You know, you might.
And I have to, and I'm sorry to interrupt. We got our warning. We got our wrap up warning.
Oh, anyway.
So I'm just gonna totally barge in right there, because I don't know if we just got like dead or what. I don't know, but probably not. But anyway, I know that we could talk for hours, so out of respect for this, I love that we're ending on the note of recognizing opportunity and the ways in which voices can be heard. I think it's a really exciting way to wrap up a conversation and to encourage us to continue this conversation outside of this webinar. So thank you both for taking the time out of your day. I know that you're both very busy. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and preparing and all the things that go into this. And thank you to AAMC for being hosts to this conversation. And I think we'll be tuning over to them, but I look forward to seeing you guys later, and I look forward to seeing everybody else at the next webinar.
Thank you all so much for those who attended, and the three of you for this really engaging conversation. I could listen to you talk all day as well, so I'm sorry to have cut you off, but this has been really wonderful. This is our last webinar of 2022. So for everyone in attendance, keep an eye out. We'll be releasing our 2023 webinar schedule soon. And then just quickly, as we close out the year at AAMC, we'd like to ask each of you to consider making a fully tax deductible year-end gift to our foundation. By doing so, you make a difference for curators, artists, art communities around the world, like the work that the three of them are doing. And with your help, we can continue investing in nonprofit curators by providing access to resources, experience, and networks, and conversations like the one that we just had. So thank you all again, and I hope you all have a wonderful new year. And yeah, we'll see you all soon. Thank you.